Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Thursday, April 10th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. It's looking like a warm one in Riverside today with a high reaching almost 86 degrees, so make sure to stay cool if you are outside. The temperature will drop down to a low near 59 degrees tonight. Coming up on the show, we delve into why former President Trump abruptly changed course on his proposed tariff plan. We will also explain exactly what travelers can expect at the airport if they attempt to fly domestically without a real ID-compliant license once the May 7th deadline passes. Stay with us for the details on these stories and more, right here on Alex's News. We begin this morning with story 1 of 2, focusing on a week of economic whiplash driven by President Trump's trade policies. It's been a real roller coaster for global markets. Joining us now is our news reporter Ethan to break down this tariff turmoil. Ethan, it sounds like Ida's been quite the ride.
Absolutely, Grace. It's been a week that really shook global trade. We saw President Trump announce massive, sweeping tariffs against numerous U.S. trading partners, only to abruptly reverse course on many of them just about 7 days later, leaving everyone scrambling.
Let's start at the beginning. What exactly did the president announce initially, and what was the justification?
Well, President Trump declared trade deficits a, quote, national emergency. According to reporting from the Associated Press carried by the St. Albert Gazette, he initially called the move Liberation Day. These weren't flat taxes. The administration claimed the tariffs were calculated based on the size of the U.S. trade deficit with each specific country. This approach immediately drew fire from economists, as noted in U.S. News and World Report via the AP. We're talking potentially huge numbers. Analysis cited by Perplexity suggests proposed tariffs reached up to 125% on imports from China and 25% on goods from Canada and Mexico, with others like Japan and the EU also targeted.
Deficit-based tariffs? That sounds complicated. Did it apply everywhere?
It did. And somewhat bizarrely, Grace, the plan included a baseline 10% tariff almost universally, plus those deficit-based additions. Perplexity's analysis highlights that this even applied to places with virtually no trade, like Heard Island and McDonald Islands, simply because they're Australian territories. Economists, according to reports in Halifax City News citing the AP, found this broad-brush approach baffling, as it didn't distinguish based on actual trade significance.
A 125% tariff on Chinese goods and hitting tiny islands. I imagine the markets weren't exactly thrilled. What was the immediate fallout?
Fallout is an understatement. It was more like market mayhem. Multiple outlets, including U.S. News and World Report and the St. Albert Gazette, reported via the AP that the stock market crashed significantly. Investors were clearly tariff IED* by the prospect of escalating trade wars and broken supply chains. Businesses worldwide started rethinking investments, and international leaders braced for a major shift. There was widespread anxiety.
So facing that kind of reaction, and presumably some political heat, what led to the sudden reversal just a week later?
There were definitely cracks showing. Reports from U.S. News and World Report and Halifax City News, again citing the AP, detailed significant disagreements within the Trump administration itself over the policy. Adding to that, the president faced considerable pushback from Republicans in Congress who were worried about the economic damage. It seems the combination of market turmoil and this internal pressure forced a rethink.
How did the reversal actually happen, and did the administration offer a clear reason for the U-turn?
It came, perhaps unsurprisingly these days, via a post on President Trump's social media platform, announcing a rollback of most of the new tariffs. As reported by outlets like the St. Albert Gazette and Halifax City News, the stock market did rebound significantly on the news, but the explanations were contradictory. The White House tried to spin it as a deliberate negotiating tactic, according to the AP reports. However, President Trump himself cited flexibility and, interestingly, pointed specifically to the negative reaction in the bond market as a key factor, as reported by U.S. News and World Report. Despite the chaos, Halifax City News noted he seemed unconcerned, focusing instead on market volatility gains for some.
So a partial rollback. Where do things stand right now, as of today, April 10th? What tariffs are actually still in effect, and what's the lasting impact?
That's the crucial point, Grace. It was only partial. Significant tariffs remain. Perplexity analysis indicates a baseline 10% tariff still applies to imports from most countries. Tariffs on Chinese goods remain exceptionally high, reportedly up to 125% on some items, as China was explicitly excluded from the pause, according to U.S. News and World Report and Halifax City News. China, for its part, maintains retaliatory tariffs around 84%. For Canada and Mexico, while goods compliant with the USMCA trade deal are tariff-free, others, including steel, aluminum, and autos, face a 25% tariff, with energy and potash at 10%. Canada also has its own retaliatory tariffs. Experts cited by the AP warn this whiplash has damaged confidence in U.S. policy stability, leaving businesses wary. Trade talks are ongoing, but no new deals are finalized. The situation remains volatile.
A complex and uncertain picture indeed. Thanks for untangling that web for us, Ethan. Drawing on reporting from the Associated Press via U.S. News and World Report, the St. Albert Gazette, and Halifax City News, along with analysis from Perplexity.
You're welcome, Grace.
All right, for our second story this morning, we're looking at a deadline that's approaching faster than a flight down the runway. The enforcement date for the Real ID Act is just around the corner. Joining us now to break down what this means for all of us is our reporter, Chloe. Chloe, thanks for being here.
Happy to be here, Grace.
So the clock is ticking. Remind us exactly when this Real ID requirement kicks in and why it's happening in the first place.
That's right, Grace. The big date is May 7th, 2025, which, as of today, April 10th, is just 27 days away. According to reporting from WHSV and North Country Public Radio, this all stems from the Real ID Act of 2005, which itself came out of recommendations from the 9/11 Commission. The main goal is really to beef up security by setting stricter, uniform standards for state-issued driver's licenses and ID cards, making them harder to fake.
Okay, so enhanced security. Where will people primarily notice this change starting May 7th?
The biggest impact for most people will be at the airport. As outlined by multiple sources, including 6abc.com and North Country Public Radio, the TSA will require a Real ID-compliant license or ID card or another acceptable form of identification just to get through security for domestic flights. WHSV also notes this applies to accessing certain federal facilities, military bases, and even nuclear power plants.
So, if people need one, how do they know if their current license is compliant? And what is the process to get one if it isn't? It sounds like you need to get your stars aligned, literally.
That's a good way to put it. North Country Public Radio points out that most Real ID compliant cards are marked with a star, usually near the top. If you don't have that star, you'll need to apply for one in person at your state's DMV, or the equivalent agency like New Jersey's Motor Vehicle Commission, or MVC. WHSV and North Country Public Radio detail the documents you'll typically need: proof of your full legal name and identity, like a passport or birth certificate, proof of date of birth, proof of your social security number, like the card itself or a W-2, proof of lawful status, and crucially, 2 documents proving your current address, think utility bills or lease agreements.
That sounds like quite a bit of paperwork. But what if someone doesn't want to get a Real ID or can't get one in time? Are they grounded?
Not necessarily. It's important to remember, as WHSV and information sourced via the Perplexity API confirm, that a Real ID isn't the only option. A valid U.S. passport or passport card works fine for air travel. Other options include DHS Trusted Traveler Cards like Global Entry or Nexus, military IDs, and permanent resident cards. So if you have one of those alternatives, you don't strictly need the Real ID star on your license for these specific purposes.
That's good clarification. However, we are hearing about some turbulence in getting these IDs in certain areas, right?
Definitely. There's a stark contrast depending on the state. For instance, 6abc.com has been reporting extensively on the difficulties in New Jersey. Residents there are facing major challenges finding appointments at the NJMVC before the deadline, citing website glitches and a sheer lack of available slots. The state is trying things like Real ID Thursdays and mobile units, but demand is high. Interestingly, the NJMVC mentioned a high rate of no-shows for appointments, urging people to cancel if they can't make it. On the flip side, WHSV reports that Virginia's DMV seems to be managing better, offering extended hours and having already issued over 4.1 million real IDs since late 2018.
With these challenges, especially in places like New Jersey, and the deadline less than a month away, is there any talk of another extension from the Department of Homeland Security?
As of today, according to the Perplexity API, DHS has not teensy plans for a further extension beyond May 7, 2025. The last extension pushed the date from May 2023 to the current one.
So May 7th is firm. What happens at the airport that day if someone shows up without a real ID or one of those alternatives you mentioned? Will they be turned away?
The TSA seems to be planning for this. Both North Country Public Radio and the Perplexity API indicate the TSA might use a phased enforcement approach, giving agencies some flexibility. More specifically, for travelers without compliant ID, the plan isn't an automatic denial. Instead, North Country Public Radio reports they'll face an extra screening process. Information from the Perplexity API suggests this involves TSA officers verifying the traveler's identity through questioning a likely personal and travel-related questions A, and potentially checking other documents the traveler might have against available databases.
Extra screening sounds like it means extra time and potential delays.
Exactly. The Perplexity API notes this process will inevitably cause delays, and the time needed will vary. While the chance of being outright denied boarding is considered low under current plans, it could happen if someone simply cannot verify their identity through this additional process. The bottom line is, if you show up without compliant ID starting May 7th, expect a longer wait at security.
It sounds like the best advice is to check your ID now. See if you have the star or an alternative like a passport, and if not, start the process immediately, especially given the potential appointment hurdles. Chloe, thank you for navigating all those details for us.
You're welcome, Grace.
Okay, here are some other headlines. The Food and Drug Administration is reversing course on its recent return-to-office mandate after the initial policy led to layoffs and resignations, threatening basic operations like drug reviews. Faced with these challenges, an internal email reveals the agency will now allow certain employees, specifically review staff and supervisors, to resume telework for at least 2 days a week. The FDA hopes this change will stabilize its workforce, ensure continuity in critical activities, and retain key personnel, reflecting broader tensions within federal agencies, balancing in-person work demands with operational efficiency. Turning to international news, the United Nations reports that Taliban morality enforcers in Afghanistan are arresting men for having non-compliant hairstyles or for skipping mosque prayers, especially during Ramadan. Barbers providing such haircuts have also been detained. These actions stem from the Taliban's Ministry for the Promotion of Virtue and Prevention of Vice, enforcing strict Islamic laws under a new, comprehensive morality code that grants them broader powers. This includes mandates on dress, segregation, and behavior like beard length. Human rights organizations criticize the arbitrary detentions and lack of due process, noting the climate of fear and the negative economic impact on small businesses. The UN has condemned these measures. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, 4 Americans now face U.S. charges related to a failed coup attempt aimed at overthrowing the government. Marcel Malanga, Tyler Thompson Jr., Benjamin Zalman Paulon, and alleged explosives expert Joseph Peter Moser are charged with crimes including conspiracy to use weapons of mass destruction and bomb government facilities. The plot was reportedly led by Marcel's father, Christian Malanga, who was killed during the attempt. 3 of the accused were initially detained in Congo, received death sentences later commuted to life, and were then repatriated to the U.S. The charges follow a long-running FBI investigation into providing training, weapons, and support to the rebel group. Meanwhile, Mexican drug lord Ernesto Don Neto Fonseca Carrillo has been released after completing his 40-year sentence. The 94-year-old co-founder of the Guadalajara cartel was convicted for his role in the 1985 kidnapping, torture, and murder of DEA agent Enrique Kiki Camarena. Fonseca, who had been under home confinement near Mexico City since 2016, was released last weekend. There is currently no indication the U.S. will seek his extradition, as legal focus remains on his cartel associate, Rafael Caro Quintero, who was extradited last year and is facing trial in the U.S. for Camarena's murder. And back in Washington, President Trump offered rare praise for Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer during an Oval Office meeting on April 10, 2025. Trump called Whitmer a, quote, very good person who has done an excellent job, a notable shift from their past clashes. Whitmer was unexpectedly invited into the Oval Office while Trump signed executive orders. Her team emphasized her presence was not an endorsement. She discussed Michigan-specific issues, including storm recovery, potential investments at Selfridge Air National Guard Base, invasive species, and the impact of tariffs, seeking exemptions for the auto and energy sectors. This interaction has fueled speculation about Whitmer's potential 2028 presidential ambitions. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King, with Claude Sonnet 3.7, Gemini Pro 2.5 Experimental, Gemini Flash 2.0, Perplexity Sonar Pro, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.